a watchman stands in the dark on a high limestone ridge in ancient Israel. The long, dry summer has baked the earth, a time of dipping apples in honey, blowing the horn, and exchanging warm greetings for a sweet and prosperous year. The people were so overwhelmed by the sheer, unapproachable holiness of God that they backed away, trembling, and begged Moses to mediate so they would not die. That was the first time the shofar is explicitly mentioned in Scripture. It is the terrifying sound of the holy, infinite Creator drawing dangerously close to fragile, sinful humanity. When God commands the watchman to blow the shofar on the first day of the 7th month, he is not just making noise. He is triggering a massive cultural memory. He is forcing the Israelites to remember the terror of the mountain. He is reminding them that the God they serve is not a tame, distant deity who simply manages their agricultural harvest. He is the consuming fire of Sinai, and his holiness cannot be approached casually. The silver trumpets organized the people. The ram's horn brought them to their knees. The shofar was meant to trigger the memory of Sinai's unapproachable fire. But the blast was not merely pointing backward to an event in the past. It was pointing forward. It was an alarm warning the nation that a fast-approaching crisis was already on the calendar. And the people had very little time to prepare. For others, in the modern church, it is treated as a rigid prophetic lockbox, a coded calendar date heavily tied to the last trump. The sound of the ram's horn was never meant to be an isolated event. It was a starting gun. If we keep reading the architectural blueprint of the calendar in Leviticus 23, the true purpose of the alarm suddenly snaps into focus. God commands the violent blast of the horn on the first day of the 7th month, but he does not end the instructions for the month there. He immediately points the Israelites toward a second, much heavier date looming on the horizon, just 9 days later. On the 10th day of the 7th month, the nation will face Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement was the absolute climax of the biblical year. It was the single most dangerous and necessary day in the life of Israel. It was the only day when the high priest was permitted to strip off his ornate garments, dress in simple white linen, and step directly into the physical presence of God inside the Holy of Holies. It was a day of intense fasting, national mourning, and the shedding of blood to cover the accumulated, unresolved sins of the entire camp. The stakes were absolute. If the priest failed to offer the incense correctly, or if the people approached the day with arrogance, holding on to unconfessed rebellion, the text warned that they would be cut off from their people, the rapture of the church, and the mapping of end times events. We have been trained to read this festival as either a cultural new year. It was a day of life and death, of severe judgment and profound mercy, colliding in a dark, windowless room at the center of the tabernacle. Now, step back and look at the divine architecture of the calendar. The Feast of Trumpets is not a standalone holiday. It is an alarm clock set exactly 10 days before the Day of Atonement. The jarring, chaotic blast of the teruah suddenly makes perfect sense. God knows the human tendency to drift. He knows that an Israelite farmer could easily spend the entire summer consumed by the anxiety of his harvest, his physical survival, and his localized disputes, completely forgetting the massive weight of his own sin. If that farmer walked into the Day of Atonement, spiritually asleep, unprepared, unrepentant, and numb to his own rebellion, he would face the consuming fire of God's holiness without the proper posture of humility. So God, in an act of severe mercy, installs a warning system. He commands a terrifying blast of a ram's horn to rip through the camp, 10 days before the veil is opened. The sound is designed to stop the economy, halt the harvest, and force every man, woman, and child to freeze in their tracks. The trumpet is declaring a singular message: wake up, the Day of Atonement is almost here. You have 10 days to examine your heart, repair your relationships, and prepare your soul to meet the holy God, or a futuristic timeline. But if you open your Bible to see what God actually commanded in the wilderness, you will find a hidden contradiction. Later, Jewish tradition accurately named this window the Days of Awe. Imagine the atmosphere in the camp during those 10 days. The piercing sound of the horn has faded, but the silence that follows is heavy. It is a period of intense, collective introspection. The people are suspended between the warning and the reckoning. The trumpet blast does not bring the judgment. It provides the grace of time before the judgment. Once the pattern becomes visible, the feast reads completely differently. The Feast of Trumpets is a profound, immediate call to personal repentance. It demands that the listener wake up in the present moment, rather than looking past it. But this deepens the central question. If this ancient alarm was so intensely focused on immediate spiritual preparation and the fast-approaching Day of Atonement, how did modern Christianity turn it into a futuristic timeline? To understand how the alarm clock of the soul became a chronological puzzle, we have to confront the prophetic trap that surrounds this feast today. The shift from an urgent, present-tense warning to a future-tense obsession did not happen by accident. It happened because modern readers often misunderstand how the New Testament uses ancient imagery. When Christians read the New Testament, they find the trumpet appearing at the absolute climax of human history. The Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians that the biblical text does not immediately support either of those modern assumptions. In fact, what makes the original instruction so shocking is exactly what is missing from it. The dead will be raised at the last trumpet. He tells the Thessalonians that the Lord will descend from heaven with the sound of the trumpet of God. Years later, the Apostle John structures the chaotic, terrifying judgments of Revelation around the blowing of 7 trumpets. Because of these passages, a distinct industry of end-times charting has grown around the fair, Feast of Trumpets. For many modern believers, the word trumpet is an immediate trigger to pull out a whiteboard. We draw elaborate timelines. We argue passionately over whether the rapture occurs before, during, or after a tribulation period. We attempt to calculate dates, map geopolitical events, and decode the book of Revelation as if it were a chronological puzzle to be solved. We look at the Feast of Trumpets and assume it is simply a prophetic placeholder, a coded clue indicating exactly what time of year Jesus will return. But, in our obsession with mapping the future, we have fallen into a dangerous trap. We have insulated ourselves from the immediate demand of the text. When Paul and John wrote about the final trumpet, they were not erasing the book of Leviticus. In Leviticus chapter 23, God gives Moses the blueprint for Israel's sacred calendar. When he institutes the Passover, the instructions are meticulously detailed. They were Jewish men whose minds were completely saturated in the Torah. They knew exactly what the teruah meant. They knew the shofar was an alarm, a battle cry, and a sudden disruption. They knew it signaled a 10-day countdown to the Day of Atonement. When they connected the return of Christ to the blast of a trumpet, they were not changing the meaning of the ancient symbol. They were magnifying it to its ultimate, cosmic scale. They were declaring that the final day of the Lord, the ultimate day of justice, judgment, and restoration, will be preceded by the ultimate alarm. The final blast will not be a polite chime. It will be the terrifying, reality-shattering shout of God Himself, ripping through the complacency of human history, demanding that all of creation stand at attention. The trap of modern eschatology is that we can become so focused on predicting the timing of the alarm that we forget to listen to what it is actually saying. You can have a perfectly structured end times chart and still be completely asleep to your own sin. You can win an argument about the chronological sequence. The people are told exactly what to eat, how to dress, and what historical deliverance they are remembering of the book of Revelation while harboring bitterness, pride, and unconfessed rebellion in your own home. We have taken an instrument designed to wake us up and turned it into an intellectual puzzle that keeps us distracted. The biblical writers did not mention the trumpet so we could calculate the exact date of the end. They mentioned it so we would change the way we live today. The promise of the final blast is meant to produce holiness, urgency, and repentance in the present. If we stop treating the trumpet merely as a prophetic lockbox to be cracked, we are forced to face a much more uncomfortable question. What is the alarm demanding of us right now? The ancient sound echoing from the wilderness is no longer just a historical curiosity or a prophecy chart. It turns out to be a devastatingly accurate mirror for our current spiritual condition. The necessity of the Feast of Trumpets exposes an uncomfortable truth about human nature. God instituted a disruptive alarm, because He knows our default spiritual condition. We do not naturally drift toward holiness. We naturally drift toward sleep. Think about the ancient Israelite farmer one last time. When he commands the Feast of Tabernacles, he explains precisely why they must live in temporary shelters. The reasons are clear. He did not wake up in the middle of July and actively decide to forget the holiness of God. He simply went to work. He focused on the immediate demands of the soil, the weather, and his family's survival. Day after day, the grueling repetition of the summer harvest slowly numbed him to the unseen spiritual reality. His physical survival felt urgent. His spiritual condition felt distant. By the time the 7th month arrived, his conscience was completely calloused. He was spiritually comatose. We are not so different. The rhythm of our lives may not be tied to an ancient agricultural calendar, but the slow, numbing effect of the ordinary is exactly the same. We wake up. We commute. We manage our careers, answer emails, pay bills, and organize our schedules. We stare at glowing screens that feed us an endless stream of trivial anxieties and manufactured outrage. The routine becomes a rhythm, and the rhythm becomes a heavy, unbreakable trance. In the middle of that trance, spiritual amnesia sets in. We stop treating our sin as a deadly weight and start treating it as a manageable habit. The sharp edges of our conscience become dull. We begin to tolerate a little more pride, a little more bitterness, and a little more quiet rebellion in our homes. But when the text reaches the Feast of Trumpets, the explanation suddenly stops. God simply commands. We assume that because God is patient today, He does not care about our secret compromises. We forget the terrifying fire of Mount Sinai. We forget the massive, incomprehensible cost of the atonement. We fall spiritually asleep at the wheel of our own lives. This is why the trumpet is a gift of severe mercy. God knows that a gentle whisper is not always enough to wake a person who is deeply asleep in their own apathy. Sometimes, what we need is not a polite devotional thought. What we need is a teruah, a violent, jarring disruption that shatters the false security of our routine. We need the sudden diagnosis that forces us to reevaluate our priorities. We need the unexpected failure that shatters our pride. We need the sudden loss that reminds us how fragile our control actually is. These painful disruptions often function as the ram's horn in our lives. They are not meant to destroy us. They are designed to wake us up before it is too late. The trumpet is sounding right now, asking you a direct question. Where have you fallen asleep? What compromise have you allowed to quietly settle into your weekly routine? What relationship have you allowed to fracture because you were too proud to ask for forgiveness? What are you treating casually? In the 7th month, on the first day of the month, you shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with blast of trumpets, that God treats with absolute holy gravity. The alarm exposes the reality of our condition, but recognizing that we have been asleep is only the first step. When the horn blasts in the dark and your eyes finally open to the depth of your own need, what are you supposed to do next? If the day of reckoning is approaching, how do you actually use the time you have left? The biblical text insists that the proper response to the alarm is not panic. The response is preparation. The moment the watchman lowers the ram's horn, the real work begins. The initial shock of the blast is over, but the silence that follows is the heaviest part of the year. For the ancient Israelite, the 10 days between the alarm and the Day of Atonement were not meant for hiding in fear. They were meant for active, deliberate preparation. This is the space where the modern believer must learn to live. We are suspended in the tension between the warning we have received and the final day of redemption that is coming. How do you maintain the posture of a watchman in your ordinary life? How do you stay awake when the surrounding culture is constantly trying to lull you back to sleep? For days, the night sky has been entirely empty. The moon, completely hidden in its invisible phase. A holy convocation. That is all. There is no historical backstory provided. There is no theological commentary. The biblical text provides a concrete mechanism for living in these days of awe. It requires 3 specific, difficult choices. First, you must stop defending your lethargy. When a loud alarm sounds in the dark, the most dangerous human response is to pull the covers over your head and try to return to sleep. We do this spiritually by justifying our compromises. We tell ourselves that our resentment is justified. Our lack of prayer is simply a season of busyness. And our hidden habits are under control. The posture of the watchman begins with brutal honesty. You must look at the spiritual drift in your life. Strip away the excuses and name it exactly for what it is. Second, you must move toward the altar, not away from it. When we are suddenly awakened to our own sin, the human instinct, dating all the way back to the Garden of Eden, is to hide. We feel the heavy weight of our failure, and we assume the blazing holiness of God means our destruction. But remember the architecture of the calendar. The trumpet does not sound to announce your execution. It sounds to invite you to the Day of Atonement. The alarm is God's aggressive grace, giving you the time to confess your rebellion before the final veil is opened. There is no mention of a new year, and no futuristic timeline offered. God commands an entire national assembly, halting all labor across the nation. You do not have to fix your own heart before approaching God. You only have to approach Him honestly. Third, you must actively change your daily rhythm. The Israelites were commanded to cease their normal labor on the Feast of Trumpets. You cannot hear the subtle conviction of the Holy Spirit if your life is relentlessly filled with the noise of your own ambition. You must carve out intentional silence. You must open the Scriptures, not merely to accumulate facts, but to let the living Word search your motives. You must ask the dangerous question, Lord, what is this current pressure revealing inside of me? Living in this window is deeply uncomfortable. It requires acknowledging that you are vulnerable and that you are utterly dependent on the blood of the sacrifice to cover your failures. But when you choose to embrace this posture, when you stop hiding, confess your drift, and depend entirely on the atonement, the terror of the sound begins to dissolve. The jarring noise of the warning transforms into the sound of rescue. The trumpet no longer sounds like a threat. It sounds like a father calling a wandering child out of the road before the danger arrives. This shift in perspective changes everything about how we anticipate the final blast at the end of the age. Based entirely on a disruptive, unexplained sound. Imagine the psychological weight of this. The people are commanded to stop working, and it allows us to return to the dark rooftop where this entire story began, to finally understand what the watchman was truly waiting for. Step back and look at the massive, unbroken architecture of what God designed in the wilderness. The Feast of Trumpets was never meant to be merely a polite calendar update. It was not given so we could exchange warm greetings and dip apples in honey. Nor was it given so modern readers could obsessively calculate the exact month of the rapture. It was a severe, physical disruption meant to shatter the deadly illusion of our self-sufficiency. It was the primal, terrifying wail of a jagged bone, echoing the unapproachable fire of Mount Sinai. It was an act of aggressive grace, warning a forgetful people that the Day of Atonement was exactly 10 days away. But for the Christian, the meaning of this ancient festival goes even deeper. When the Apostle John was exiled in the darkness of the island of Patmos, the book of Revelation tells us he fell into a deep spiritual trance. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. He did not hear a literal ram's horn. He wrote that he heard a loud, piercing voice like a trumpet. When he turned around to see where the violent alarm came from, he did not see an ancient watchman. He saw the resurrected, glorified Jesus Christ, standing in the center of the lampstands with eyes like flaming fire. Gather together and listen to a blaring horn. But no one is reading a story to tell them why. The sound itself is the message. Jesus himself is the waking sound. His word is the teruah, the alarm that cuts through our complacency and shatters our spiritual sleep. And beautifully, he is not only the trumpet that warns us of the coming day of reckoning, he is also the high priest, who has already secured our redemption. The warning and the rescue are now found in the exact same person. Picture that ancient watchman one last time. Standing alone on the high limestone ridge, he is staring into a pitch-black sky, waiting through the long silence for the faintest sliver of silver to appear. When he finally draws the dry night air into his lungs and blows into the hollow bone, the violent shriek wakes every sleeper in the valleys below. The darkness is suddenly alive with noise, but the sleepers who open their eyes do not need to cower in terror in their beds. They only need to rise and prepare, because the blood of the sacrifice is already waiting for them at the center of the camp. That is the true, hidden power of the trumpet. This has never been a story about deciphering the future. It is a story about waking up to reality right now. The alarm is sounding in your life today, not to condemn you, but to call you out of your spiritual lethargy. The problem is not that the verse is unclear. The problem is that we stop reading too early, assuming we already know what the trumpet means. It is demanding that you drop the heavy harvest of your own ambition. Look up from the dirt of your daily routine, and remember the absolute holiness of the God you serve. You do not have to hide from the blast. You do not have to defend your apathy, and you do not have to pretend you have not drifted. You only have to open your eyes, confess your deep need, and move confidently toward the cross, where your atonement is entirely complete. The silence of the long night has been broken. The only question is whether you are willing to wake up. This is not ultimately a story about charting the future. It is a story about waking up in the present. God commanded that noise for a specific strip. Urgent reason, one that confronts every reader who has ever drifted into spiritual apathy. But if the text does not directly explain the purpose of the alarm, how were the ancient Israelites supposed to understand that violent blast in the dark? To solve the mystery, we first have to strip away the traditions we have added to the text. If you walk into a synagogue today during this festival, you will not immediately feel the tension of an unexplained alarm. The man is staring toward the western horizon, straining his eyes, waiting for a specific moment. Finally, he sees it. You will experience Rosh Hashanah, literally translated from Hebrew as the head of the year. Families gather around tables. Apples are dipped in sweet honey. Prayers are offered, and joyous greetings are exchanged for a prosperous new year ahead. It is a beautiful, deeply meaningful tradition that has sustained the Jewish people through centuries of exile and hardship. But there is a historical problem. If you take this modern celebration and read it directly backward into the wilderness wanderings of Leviticus, the timeline breaks. The biblical text is stubbornly specific. God tells Moses that this memorial of blowing trumpets must occur on the first day of the 7th month, not the first month. When God established the sacred calendar at the time of the Exodus, he explicitly placed the beginning of the year in the spring, in the month of Passover. He told the Israelites, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months." Therefore, the Feast of Trumpets, landing in the autumn, sits exactly halfway through the redemptive calendar. Over the centuries, the Jewish civil calendar evolved. Much like a modern society operates on a fiscal year or an academic year that begins in the autumn. Later, rabbinic tradition began observing the civil new year in the 7th month, but that was a later development in history. A razor-thin sliver of silver breaking the blackness. He raises a jagged, hollowed-out animal bone to his lips. In the original architecture of the Torah, this day is not the beginning of the year. It is exactly the opposite. The biblical Feast of Trumpets is a mid-year disruption. It arrives at the end of the grueling summer agricultural season. For 6 months, the Israelites have been planting, tending, and harvesting. Under the scorching Middle Eastern sun, they have gathered the wheat, the grapes, and the figs. Their hands are calloused. Their minds are focused purely on commerce, physical survival, and the dirt beneath their feet. And, as any human being knows, spiritual amnesia easily sets in when you are entirely consumed by the physical demands of life. You simply forget to look up. Then, the 7th month begins. In biblical theology, the number 7 is never accidental. It always signals a divine pause, just as the 7th day is a Sabbath of rest to recalibrate the week. The 7th month is a Sabbath month, a concentrated season of heavy spiritual weight. When the horn shatters the autumn sky, it is not politely announcing that a new calendar year has arrived. It is announcing that the daily human routine must violently stop. Imagine standing in a field in ancient Judea. You have a heavy basket of harvested grain on your shoulder, your mind racing with calculations about winter provisions. He draws in the dry night air, and he blows. A violent, shrieking blast tears through the silence. Suddenly, the piercing shriek of the animal horn echoes off the hills. You are commanded by God to drop the basket. The harvest is paused. The economy halts. The Creator is injecting a jarring, unavoidable interruption into the middle of your ordinary life, asserting His authority over your schedule, your anxiety, and your ambition. The familiar modern interpretation is not entirely wrong. The season is indeed a time of serious reflection, but by assuming the feast was originally just a New Year's Day, we lose the aggressive, interrupting nature of the command. The trumpet was not a celebratory chime ringing in January. If it was not signaling the new year, what exactly was this mid-year disruption meant to achieve? To understand the true weight of the alarm, we have to look closely at the specific Hebrew words God used to describe the noise itself. In the English translation of Leviticus, the command sounds rather musical and dignified. We read the polite instruction to observe a memorial proclaimed with blast of trumpets. When modern readers encounter the word trumpet in an ancient text, they naturally picture a polished brass instrument. They imagine a clear, rhythmic fanfare announcing the arrival of a royal procession, or perhaps a solemn, orderly melody played at a state gathering. The problem is that the English translation, while accurate in its final intent, softens the physical reality of what the ancient Israelites actually heard. It is not a musical melody. It is a raw, unrefined scream down in the valleys below. Men and women wake up in the dark. To understand the true atmosphere of this day, we have to look at the exact Hebrew phrase recorded in the scroll. The command is to observe a zikron teruah, the first word. Zikron means a memorial or a remembrance. It is an active bringing to mind of a forgotten reality. But the second word, teruah, completely shatters any assumption of a peaceful holiday. Teruah is not a musical note. It is not a structured melody. It is the Hebrew word for a loud shout, a jarring blast, a battle cry, or a violent alarm. The English phrase is narrower than the Hebrew expression. To the original audience standing in the wilderness, a teruah was not a sound that inspired peaceful reflection. A teruah was the terrifying noise you heard when an invading army suddenly crested the ridge. It was the frantic, breathless shout of a watchman who had just spotted enemy chariots on the horizon. It was the chaotic, adrenaline-fueled alarm that tore through a sleeping camp when danger was imminent. When the prophet Amos describes the devastating judgment of warfare, he warns that destruction will come with shouting, "Teruah," in the day of battle. The sudden noise is jarring, echoing off the stone hills, signaling that the first day of the 7th month has officially arrived. When Joshua's army finally brings down the impenetrable stone walls of Jericho, they do it by releasing a massive, deafening teruah. It is the universal ancient sound of unavoidable crisis. This reveals a profound contradiction at the very heart of the festival. God explicitly commands the people to observe a day of solemn rest. All normal labor is forbidden. They are supposed to be completely, physically still. Yet the divinely appointed soundtrack to this rest is the sound of absolute panic. Imagine being commanded to sit quietly in your home, completely at rest, while a deafening air raid siren blares relentlessly outside your window. You cannot work, but you also cannot sleep. You are forced to be entirely still while your nervous system is screaming that an emergency is unfolding. That is the physical reality of the Feast of Trumpets. It is a deliberate, uncomfortable collision of rest and alarm. God is demanding that his people pause their normal lives and listen to a battle cry. He is forcing them to remember that their daily routines, the harvest, the economy, the endless pursuit of physical survival are fragile and temporary. The teruah jolts them out of their spiritual slumber, demanding their absolute, undivided attention. The alarm is meant to warn them that something massive is rapidly approaching, and they are not ready for it. But this creates an immediate question. This is the beginning of the biblical festival known today as the Feast of Trumpets. If you mention this day to most modern Bible readers, why would God command a terrifying battle cry on a day of holy rest? What exactly is the alarm warning them about? The terror of the sound only begins to make sense when we look closely at the specific physical instrument God commanded them to use. The sound of an alarm is only as terrifying as the instrument used to produce it. When we read about trumpets in the biblical text, we are frequently reading the single English translation of two completely different physical objects. To understand the psychological impact of the Feast of Trumpets, we have to separate the silver from the bone. In the book of Numbers, God commands Moses to make 2 trumpets of hammered silver. In Hebrew, these are the chatzotzrot. They were long, straight, beautiful, and perfectly symmetrical. They were crafted by human hands and blown exclusively by the priests. When the silver trumpets sounded, they produced a clear, orderly tone. They were used to coordinate the movement of the camp, to signal the gathering of the leaders, and to bring structure to the millions of Israelites navigating the desert. The silver trumpets represented civilization, communication, and human order. But the silver trumpet is not the defining instrument of this autumn festival, the blast that shatters the sky. 2 very different assumptions usually emerge. For some, it is immediately associated with Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. On the first day of the 7th month is produced by a shofar. The shofar is not made of precious, polished metal. It is an animal horn, usually taken from a ram, hollowed out and stripped of its marrow. It is an organic artifact, jagged, curved, and asymmetrical. It is shaped by nature rather than a metalsmith. And when a watchman forces his breath through the narrow bone, it does not produce a melodic, structured note. It produces a primal, piercing wail. It sounds less like human music and more like a creature weeping. God deliberately bypasses the pristine silver and chooses the unrefined bone. To understand why, we have to recognize what the sound of the ram's horn meant to the original audience standing in the wilderness. Before the Feast of Trumpets was ever instituted, the nation of Israel had heard this exact sound once before. In Exodus chapter 19, the newly freed slaves are gathered at the base of Mount Sinai. The peak of the mountain is completely wrapped in thick, black smoke, billowing upward like a furnace. The ground beneath their feet is violently shaking. God is descending in fire. And out of the terrifying darkness, the text says, there came a very loud blast of a ram's horn. As the people watched the lightning and felt the earthquake, the sound of the shofar grew louder and louder.